I trusted one person with my secret. That night, police knocked. My best friend had reported me for crimes he committed. I proved the truth and destroyed my career doing it. He faced no real consequences. I lost everything. He said I'd have done the same. He was wrong. Before I tell you how that happened, take a second to support this story, follow along and let me know where you're listening from. It helps these stories reach people who need them. I worked for a government contractor, the kind of job that sounds prestigious at family dinners but feels like slow suffocation by 30. I'd signed a 5-year contract with penalties I couldn't afford to break. Non-compete clauses covering half the industry. Golden handcuffs, except there was nothing golden about my situation. My mother had stage 3 cancer. The experimental treatment wasn't covered by standard insurance. I'd taken on debt I couldn't see the end of, medical bills that compounded faster than I could pay them down. Every month was a brutal calculation: rent, treatment, food, survive, repeat. I couldn't quit. Couldn't transfer. Couldn't even imagine a way out that didn't involve complete financial ruin. So I stayed. Did my work. Kept my head down. Tried to make it through one more day, one more week, one more billing cycle. That's when I found the irregularity in the data. I was running a routine audit, the kind of mindless task that usually took an hour. But the numbers weren't adding up. Reports we'd submitted to federal regulators didn't match the raw data in our systems. Someone had adjusted figures, not dramatically, just enough to shift conclusions. Just enough to make a failing project look viable. Just enough to secure another year of funding. I stared at my screen for 20 minutes, cross-referencing, hoping I'd made a mistake in my analysis. I hadn't. Someone had manipulated federal data. And if anyone discovered it, if regulators found it, if oversight got involved, the entire project would collapse. Contracts would be terminated. People would lose their jobs. I'd lose mine. And with my contract terms and the non-compete clauses, losing this job meant career death in the industry. I should have reported it immediately. Gone through proper channels. Protected myself with documentation and official procedures. But I was scared. Terrified of being blamed for discovering it. Terrified of becoming the whistleblower who got blacklisted from the industry. Terrified of what happened to people who made noise in systems designed to stay quiet and profitable. So I did what terrified people do when they don't know what else to do. I confided in the one person I trusted completely. My best friend, David. We'd known each other since college. Shared an apartment junior year, studied together, failed together, succeeded together. He worked in the same division as me, different team. He'd been my advocate when I got hired, my support when my mother got sick, my anchor when everything felt impossible. If anyone would know how to handle this without destroying my life, it was him. I called him that night. Asked if we could meet somewhere private, somewhere we could talk without being overheard. We sat in his car in an empty parking lot 20 minutes from the office. I showed him everything, the raw data, the altered reports, the timeline of changes. I laid it all out on my laptop screen, walking him through every discrepancy. What do? I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound calm. He didn't hesitate. You stay quiet. I can't just ignore federal data manipulation. Listen to me. His voice was calm, certain, the voice of someone who understood how these things actually worked. You report this, you become the problem. They'll investigate you first. They'll assume you're trying to cover your own mistakes or settle some grudge with a colleague. You'll get suspended during the review process. Maybe fired. Definitely marked as a troublemaker who can't be trusted. But if I don't report it and it comes out later, nothing happens, he said flatly. This kind of thing gets caught eventually, or it doesn't. Either way, it's not your responsibility to be the hero. You've got enough on your plate with your mother's treatment. You need this job. You need the insurance. You can't afford to be noble right now. It made sense. It felt like wisdom from someone who understood how institutions actually functioned, not how they were supposed to function in theory. I'll keep this between us, he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. I'll watch your back. If anything comes up, if this surfaces through other channels, I'll handle it quietly. But you need to trust me and stay completely out of it. Don't mention it to anyone else. Don't document it. Just let it go and focus on what actually matters, your mother. I trusted him. God, I trusted him with everything I had. That choice would lock the door behind me forever. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that conversation was already being recorded. 3 days later, at 11 at night, someone knocked on my apartment door. I thought it was a neighbor. Maybe a delivery I'd forgotten about. Something normal and mundane. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 people in dark suits. Government badges visible on their belts. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might vomit. They said my name before I even opened the door. Full name, middle initial, everything. "We need to ask you some questions about data irregularities in Project Sentinel," the woman said when I finally opened up. Her tone was professional, clinical, the kind of voice that's had extensive practice delivering bad news to people. I let them in because refusing felt like an admission of guilt. They sat on my couch and asked about the audit. About what I'd found. About the discrepancies between raw data and submitted reports. About whether I'd reported it through proper channels. I told them the truth, or most of it. I discovered inconsistencies during routine analysis. I documented them in my personal notes. I was still verifying the extent of the problem before deciding how to proceed. "When were you planning to report this?" the man asked. I was still gathering. "You've had 3 days," he said, cutting me off. My mouth went completely dry. "We have reason to believe you've been aware of data manipulation for over 72 hours and failed to report it as required by your contract and federal regulations," the woman said. "We also have credible testimony suggesting you may have been directly involved in the manipulation itself." The room tilted sideways. "That's insane. I'm the one who discovered the problem. Then why didn't you report it immediately upon discovery?" I had no answer that didn't sound like a confession of something. They placed me on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Told me not to discuss the case with anyone. Not to contact colleagues. Not to access company systems or communications. Not to leave the state without permission. I was publicly named in an internal memo the next morning. My name, my face from the company directory, my entire career reduced to a single paragraph, under investigation for potential data manipulation and failure to report regulatory violations. Everyone I worked with got that memo. Everyone in the industry would know within 48 hours. I sat in my apartment trying to understand what had just happened. How had they known? Who had reported me? Who had provided testimony that I was involved in the actual manipulation? The file they'd referenced didn't exist yesterday. Someone had already told my story for me, and they'd told a version where I was the villain. And I knew exactly who it had to be. I called David 17 times that day. Every call went to voicemail. I drove to his house that evening. His car was in the driveway, lights on inside the house. I knocked for 5 minutes. He never came to the door. I sent emails. Text messages. Voicemails that started calm and professional and ended desperate and incoherent. Nothing. Complete silence. 2 weeks into the investigation, I got a message from a mutual colleague. Someone who still worked in the division. The message was vague, carefully worded, the kind of communication someone sends when they know their work accounts are being monitored. David submitted a compliance report. Said you confided in him about data issues and explicitly asked him to help you cover them up. He documented the entire conversation and went to compliance within 48 hours to protect himself from potential liability. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again, slower, making sure I understood every word. Then I just sat there, staring at my phone screen until it went dark. The evidence was real. The context was gone. I finally got David on the phone a month into the investigation. I'd tried every number I had for him. Finally caught him on his personal cell at 8 in the morning, probably before he'd fully woken up and remembered he was avoiding me. His voice was measured when he answered. Apologetic in that careful way people sound when they've already made complete peace with what they've done. "I didn't have a choice," he said before I could even speak. "You lied about what I told you. I reported what I knew. That you discovered irregularities and didn't report them through proper channels. That you involved me in the situation without my consent. That you asked for my advice on how to handle it quietly. I had to protect myself. I came to you for help. And I gave you advice. You chose not to take it. That's not my responsibility or my fault." I wanted to scream. To rage. To reach through the phone and make him look me in the eye and explain how you do this to someone who trusted you with everything. But his story was cleaner than mine. His timeline was better documented. He'd submitted his compliance report 2 days after our conversation, framing himself as the responsible employee who acted immediately when confronted with potential wrongdoing. I looked like someone who'd been caught and scrambled desperately for cover. "You could have just said nothing," I said, my voice breaking. "You could have stayed completely out of it. And risk being implicated when this inevitably came out? You think loyalty means committing career suicide? I thought it meant not actively destroying someone who trusted you." He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him breathing. "Loyalty required sacrifice," he finally said. "I'm genuinely sorry you ended up being it. But I had to make a choice, and I chose myself." Then he hung up. I sat there holding my dead phone, understanding with perfect, crystalline clarity what had actually happened. He never denied it. He never even tried to justify it morally. He just explained the transaction like it was obvious. He said loyalty required sacrifice. And I realized I was the sacrifice he decided was acceptable. The investigation dragged on for 3 brutal months. I burned through my savings in the first 6 weeks. Couldn't work. Couldn't get hired anywhere else with an active federal investigation on my record. Couldn't even explain to potential employers why I'd suddenly left my last position. My mother's treatment continued. The bills kept arriving like clockwork. I sold everything I could. My car. My furniture. Electronics. Anything with resale value. I borrowed money from family members who could barely afford to lend it. I watched my credit score crater in real time. And then, when I'd almost given up completely, I found it. A friend still inside the company, someone who owed me a significant favor from years back, sent me a file. Heavily encrypted. Anonymously delivered through multiple proxy servers. It was the complete data trail. Every edit. Every timestamp. Every user credential associated with every change made to Project Sentinel data over the past 18 months. The manipulation had started 8 months before I discovered it during my audit. The person responsible had covered their tracks carefully, using permission overrides and system backdoors to hide their activity. Except for 3 entries where the automated backup system had logged the original user ID before the override took effect. David's user ID. He'd altered the federal data himself. And when I discovered it, when I came to him terrified and asking for guidance, he'd reported me immediately to redirect the investigation before it could possibly reach him. I had proof. Clear, undeniable, timestamped proof that I'd been systematically framed and that the actual perpetrator had been protected by my silence and my trust. There was only one problem. To expose the truth, I had to completely destroy myself. The file I possessed was classified at the highest level. Accessing it without authorization, even receiving it, violated approximately a dozen federal regulations and security protocols. If I leaked it, if I submitted it as evidence, I'd be admitting to unauthorized access of protected government systems. I'd prove my innocence on the data manipulation charges. And I'd absolutely guarantee my guilt on security violations that carried potential criminal penalties. There was no version of this story where I walked away clean. Silence would preserve what remained of my professional name. Speaking would end any possibility of ever working in the field again. I spent a week trying to find another way. Any other way. Lawyers told me the evidence was legally inadmissible. That it would be thrown out immediately and I'd face additional charges. Colleagues still willing to speak with me told me to let it go, to take whatever quiet settlement the company offered, to sign the non-disclosure agreement and move on with my life. Everyone had the same advice: survive this however you can and put it behind you. But moving on meant living with the lie. Meant letting David keep his position, his reputation, his career that he'd built partially on my destruction. Meant teaching myself that truth mattered less than personal survival. I couldn't do it. I couldn't become that person. So I pressed send anyway. The anonymous leak hit 3 major regulatory bodies and 2 investigative journalists simultaneously. Complete data logs. Full timeline. Irrefutable evidence of who had manipulated the federal reports and exactly when they'd done it. The story broke 48 hours later. Government contractor systematically manipulated safety data, framed colleague to avoid detection. I watched it spread across industry news sites and mainstream media. Watched the official retractions start appearing. Watched internal investigations get quietly reopened with the correct target identified. Within a week, I was officially cleared. Completely exonerated. Every accusation formally withdrawn. No one cared. The news cycle had already moved on within 3 days. My name appeared in exactly 2 correction notices, both buried at the bottom of follow-up articles that most people never bothered reading. David was quietly transferred to a different project. Not fired. Not formally charged with anything. Just moved laterally to an equivalent position with the same salary and a note in his permanent file that would never actually affect his career trajectory. Truth doesn't trend the way accusations do. People remembered my investigation. They remembered seeing my name associated with data manipulation and federal violations. The corrections were page 3 search results, if they appeared at all. When I applied for new positions, HR departments Googled my name and found the original investigation stories. Found my face attached to words like manipulation and federal violations and investigation. My name had become a warning. I existed in professional purgatory. Technically vindicated by official channels. Practically unemployable in any meaningful capacity. The medical bills kept piling up relentlessly. My mother's cancer treatment continued, but I couldn't afford the specialist care anymore, couldn't pay for the experimental protocols that might have actually helped. We downgraded to standard treatment covered by basic insurance. I lost my apartment. Moved into a friend's spare room temporarily. Then another friend's couch. Then finally a studio apartment I could barely afford in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. And through all of it, through every humiliation and loss, I kept thinking about that conversation in David's car. How earnest he'd seemed. How concerned for my well-being. How perfectly he'd positioned himself to benefit from my trust while minimizing his own risk. I saw him one final time. An industry conference 6 months after everything collapsed. An event I'd crashed hoping desperately to network my way back into some form of employability. He was on a panel. Presenting on ethics and transparency in government contracting. The irony was physically painful. I waited until after his session ended. Caught him near the coffee station where speakers gathered. "David." He turned. His expression flickered through surprise, discomfort, then settled into careful neutrality. "I heard you were cleared," he said. "I'm genuinely glad that worked out." "Are you?" "Of course. I never wanted any of this. You destroyed my entire life to save yours." People nearby glanced over. He lowered his voice immediately. "I did what I had to do to survive. You would have done exactly the same thing in my position. I came to you for help. And I helped myself. That's how survival actually works in the real world." He wasn't angry. Wasn't defensive. Just completely matter of fact, like he was explaining basic economics. "You could have told the truth," I said. "Truth is expensive. I couldn't afford it. Neither could you, apparently, given how things turned out. So you decided to make me pay instead." He adjusted his conference badge. Checked his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. "I'm sorry it worked out this way. I genuinely am. But we both made choices based on what we thought we could live with. I chose to trust you. And I chose to survive." He met my eyes directly. "One of us still has a career. One of us is still functioning in the industry. That should tell you something about which choice was correct." Then he walked away. Back to his panel obligations. Back to his professional reputation. Back to the life he'd preserved by sacrificing mine without hesitation. I stood there with cold coffee and the complete wreckage of everything I'd ever believed about loyalty, friendship, and the actual value of truth. Hatred would have been safer. If David had been my enemy from the start, I would have protected myself. I would have documented everything. I would have covered my tracks and maintained appropriate professional distance. But he was my friend. My best friend. And friendship meant trust. And trust meant vulnerability. And vulnerability meant I'd handed him the knife he'd eventually use to cut me out of my own life. I don't work in the industry anymore. Can't. The security clearance issues, the background checks, the quiet phone calls HR departments make to verify employment history, they all lead to the same dead end. I do freelance consulting work now. Contract projects. Small assignments that don't require extensive references or detailed explanations of career gaps. My mother died 8 months after I lost my position. Not because her treatment stopped entirely, it didn't. But because we couldn't afford the level of intensive care that might have bought her more time, might have given her a real chance. I was with her at the end. Holding her hand in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. She told me she was proud that I'd told the truth. That integrity mattered more than professional success. That I'd done the right thing. I nodded and held her hand and didn't tell her that my integrity had cost me absolutely everything and bought me nothing except the ability to look at myself in the mirror. I see David's name sometimes. LinkedIn updates announcing promotions. Conference speaker lists. Industry publication bylines. He's doing extremely well. Rising steadily through the ranks. That presentation he gave on ethics and transparency in government contracting got published in a professional journal. He's now considered a thought leader on compliance issues. The universe has absolutely no sense of irony whatsoever. I don't hate him anymore. That's the genuinely strange part. Hatred would imply he'd violated some fundamental code that we'd both agreed to follow. But he'd made his priorities perfectly clear. Survival. Career advancement. Self-preservation above all else. I'd just been naive enough to think our friendship somehow superseded those things. People occasionally ask if I regret exposing the truth. If I'd make different choices knowing how everything turned out. I tell them I regret needing to make that choice at all. I regret working in a system where honesty was systematically punished and manipulation was quietly rewarded. I regret trusting someone who'd already calculated the precise cost of my friendship and found it completely acceptable. But I don't regret the actual choice I made. Because the alternative was living as someone I fundamentally couldn't respect. Someone who stayed silent to stay comfortable. Someone who learned that truth was negotiable and loyalty was purely transactional. I couldn't be that person and still recognize myself. Even if being honest meant becoming professionally invisible. So here I am. Unemployable in my field. Socially isolated. Vindicated only on paper in regulatory archives that nobody reads. I don't have a career anymore. Don't have savings. Don't have the comfortable future I'd carefully planned. But I have something David will never understand or possess. I can look directly at myself in the mirror without flinching. And that's a trait I've made complete peace with. Not because it feels good. It absolutely doesn't. It feels like losing everything that mattered. But because some losses are still victories if you're measuring the right things. You can lose everything external and still walk away with yourself fundamentally intact. David kept his career. His professional reputation. His promising future. I kept my integrity. The world will tell you I made the objectively wrong choice. That I should have been smarter, more strategic, less naively trusting. Maybe they're right by their metrics. But I sleep at night now. And when I think carefully about who I actually am versus who I could have become, when I imagine the alternate version of myself who stayed silent, who let the lie stand, who learned that self-preservation justified any betrayal, I know I made the only choice I could actually live with long-term. Hatred tells you exactly where the enemy stands. Loyalty lets them stand close enough to destroy you. And I stood close enough to hand David everything he needed to completely destroy my life. That's on me. The trust. The vulnerability. The belief that our friendship meant something more than convenient professional networking. But what he chose to do with that trust, that's entirely on him. And he'll carry that whether he consciously admits it or not. I lost my career. My financial stability. My mother. My imagined future. He lost the ability to honestly claim he's a good person. I know which loss I'd rather carry for the rest of my life. Even if I'm carrying it completely alone. Before you go, do me a small favor. If stories about quiet strength, hidden truths, and lives rebuilt resonate with you, support this channel by subscribing and sharing where you're watching from in the comments. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most, sometimes more than they realize.